Elon Musk's retort to the host's attempt to confront him was not only cutting, it was also a sobering reminder of reality. The atmosphere in the studio was charged with a palpable tension that felt so thick that it could be sliced through with a knife. The red light on the camera started flashing, indicating that a live broadcast was about to begin. The liberal talk show host, who was known for her sharp tongue and no-holds-barred approach, leaned forward in her chair and fixed her eyes on the guest sitting across from her. Elon Musk sat with a relaxed expression, his hands resting comfortably on his knees. He was wearing a plain dark blazer. The audience was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see how the billionaire inventor would respond to the pointed questions that had already been hinted at in the host's opening remarks. His mere presence commanded attention, but the air was charged with expectancy. As she began, Mr. Musk, you have been called many things: visionary, disruptor, or even controversial. But some critics say your business practices and recent political views raise serious ethical questions. How do you respond to those who claim you're prioritizing profits over people? Her voice was steady, but it had a hint of challenge in it. Musk inclined his head a little, and the corners of his mouth turned up into a tiny smile. He paused for a bit before answering, his eyes moving about the studio as if he were trying to figure out how much his words would carry. He spoke in a low but clear voice, saying, I think it's fair for people to question things. But questioning is not the same as assuming that someone has bad intentions. If we are going to discuss ethics, we should probably start by asking who is in control of the narrative and why. The host was taken by surprise by his sudden change of direction and blinked for a second. Are you implying that there is a bigger problem at hand that goes beyond what you have done? Elon Musk leaned forward, his tone calm yet with an unmistakable sense of seriousness. Definitely. What worries me is not just the criticism, it's the way information is controlled and the way narratives are shaped to influence how the public sees things. That's where the real danger is. The room felt as if it was holding its breath. People watching from home moved closer to their displays. This was not the way they had anticipated things would go. Musk was not just defending himself, he was also taking the topic in a new direction. However, when the presenter attempted to take back control of the story, the next words that Musk spoke would leave both her and the audience feeling a sensation of discomfort that they were unable to get rid of. The host rapidly regained her calm, thanks to her acute instincts kicking in. She leaned in closer, her face showing both doubt and interest. Mr. Musk, let's not get sidetracked. We are discussing the decisions you have made, such as laying off employees at your companies, your controversial views on free speech, and your dubious partnerships. Are you implying that the backlash you are experiencing is part of a larger planned narrative? Musk leaned back in his chair. He seemed calm, but his eyes were sharp. I am proposing that people's beliefs are frequently influenced not by the truth, but by what they are told to believe. Let's examine the current media landscape. How frequently do you come across reporting that is unbiased? How often are voices that go against the norm silenced or disregarded as controversial? The host looked surprised. Are you saying that the media is manipulating you? He Musk remarked in a steady voice. It's not just me. And his tone was calm but firm. It's larger than me. The question isn't whether or not I'm a victim. The question is, who determines what you believe and what you are permitted to question? While information is controlled, freedom dies. It's that simple. The presenter let out a short breath, obviously attempting to steer the topic in her direction. That's a pretty daring thing to say. But let's be real, people are worried about your platforms. Misinformation spreads like crazy. Don't you think some regulations are needed to avoid causing damage? Musk's lips turned up into a crooked smile. Who is in charge? Who gets to decide what is misinformation? And to tell you that it is not as simple as people think. When you give a small group the power to determine the truth, you are giving them a weapon that can be used to suppress dissent, to stifle innovation, and to control minds. The host appeared to hesitate for a while as Musk's counter-arguments began to undermine the questions she had so carefully prepared. The audience, whether they were in the studio or at home, could sense the change in the dynamics. This was not simply an interview, it was turning into a clash of beliefs. But Musk wasn't finished yet. The next thing he did would convert the conversation from a simple exchange of views to a full-blown reckoning. Musk leaned in a little, his eyes bright and focused. He spoke in a calm voice and he chose each word carefully. The real danger is that when the media and powerful institutions work together, they create the illusion that everyone agrees. They don't just control the narrative, they control reality. That's when freedom is not just in danger, it's already gone. The host squirmed in her chair, clearly feeling uncomfortable. That sounds like conspiracy talk, Mr. Musk. Are you saying that there is some kind of coordinated effort to, manipulate the world? Musk replied, what I'm saying is that there is a system in place, and it is not designed to be transparent or accountable. Let me give you an example, and he held the group in suspense. How many times have we seen stories come out only to be debunked weeks, months, or even years later? At that time, the damage is done. People don't remember the correction, they remember the lie. And then the ones telling those lies face no consequences. The audience did not make a sound. The camera zoomed in a little, capturing the anxiety that was visible on the host's face. As she attempted to take back control, her voice becoming more assertive. Isn't that the reason why social media platforms like yours are being examined so closely? You let unverified information circulate. Doesn't that mean you are part of the problem? Musk's response was prompt and composed, and his words were significant. While scrutiny is important, it must be mutual. When governments, corporations, and media collaborate to label dissent as misinformation, it is not about the truth, it is about control. This is why free speech is important, even when it is messy, because the alternative is much worse. The host's confidence started to falter as her well-planned arguments struggled to withstand Musk's unyielding reasoning. Mr. Musk, you are painting a very bleak picture. Are you saying that there is no hope for balance or accountability? Musk's eyes become a little bit narrower. He said there's hope in a voice that was softer than before, but still just as strong. However, it begins with individuals questioning what they are told rather than simply accepting it because it comes from a reliable source. We must remain alert. We must insist on transparency. And we must keep in mind that freedom is not something that is given to us. It is something that we must fight to maintain. His remarks had a heavy impact. The studio was completely silent. For a little period, the presenter appeared to be uncertain about what to say. The seriousness of the discussion had caused her to lose her typical sharpness. However, the quietness would not continue for long. Musk had more to say, and what he said next would compel the audience to face some painful realities. Musk's posture became more upright, and his attitude changed from friendly to determined. He started speaking in a calm voice that broke the silence, saying, "Let me show you what I mean. Consider the recent controversies surrounding whistleblowers. These are individuals who put everything on the line to reveal corruption or manipulation. How are they treated? They are demonized, their credibility is ruined, and the institutions they expose, they walk away unscathed." Here's your host tried to interrupt, but Musk raised his hand a little, not to dismiss her, but as a subtle way of telling her to wait before she made her counter-argument. He went on to say, "Let's examine the surveillance programs. Years ago, people thought government monitoring of citizens was a paranoid fantasy. Then we got the leaks. We learned how deep it really went. But instead of outrage leading to accountability, it became normalized. Now people shrug it off, they say, and that's just the way things are. And that's the problem." He stopped for a while to let the impact of what he had spoken settle in. The crowd, whether they were in the studio or watching from home, listened intently to every word. Musk leaned forward once again, and his voice became a little quieter. Hear or consider the headlines you see every day. Have you noticed how some stories are given more attention than others? Stories that don't fit the preferred agenda are ignored, dismissed, or labeled as misinformation. The host took a deep breath, visibly grappling with how to redirect the conversation. But isn't it the role of journalists to fact-check, to provide accurate information? Are you saying we should have no gatekeepers at all? Musk's response was measured but firm. Fact-checking is vital, but only when it's impartial. What we have now isn't fact-checking, it's selective enforcement. You don't need to silence everyone to control a narrative. You just need to silence enough people to make dissent seem isolated. That is how you create agreement. The host finally found an opportunity, leaning forward with her own intensity. But doesn't your own platform contribute to this chaos? Aren't you part of the problem you're criticizing? Musk nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. Social media isn't perfect, but it's also one of the few places where people can still challenge the narrative, at least for now. The solution isn't more censorship, it's more transparency. If we start policing ideas, we lose innovation, and when innovation dies, so does progress. The room grew still again, the weight of the discussion palpable. The host glanced at her notes, but seemed hesitant to push further. Musk seized the moment. "Ask yourself this," he said, his tone quieter, but no less intense. How much of what you believe is something you've truly questioned, and how much is something you've just been told to believe? However, before the presenter had a chance to answer, Musk changed the subject again, this time directing the discussion toward the serious consequences of unrestrained power and how it will affect the future of humanity. The host looked nervously at the teleprompter, her confidence clearly shaken. The interview had completely gotten away from her, and the atmosphere in the studio had changed. It was not just tense, it was unsettling. The studio crew, who usually not care about the exchanges they witnessed, seemed transfixed. The only sounds breaking the heavy silence were the faint sound of shuffling papers and the hum of the overhead lights. "Mr. Musk," the host began, her voice faltering slightly, "you're painting a very bleak picture of our society. But Isn't this story about control and manipulation just a ruse for you to distract from your own controversies? People believe that your ideas and decisions have consequences, which you seem to conveniently overlook. Musk's gaze remained steady. He spoke calmly, and his words seemed to weigh heavily on the room. Criticism is fair. Being held accountable is essential. However, the issue is not whether I have made mistakes. We all have. And the question is, who stands to gain when we are too preoccupied with dispute to understand the larger context? Take a look at what is happening around us. The erosion of privacy, the consolidation of power, and the suppression of voices that do not conform with a given narrative. These events are not random. They are signs that the system values control more than it values the truth. The host's jaw clenched, clearly showing her frustration. She was a professional who was used to controlling the narrative, but Musk had taken over and was not going to give up control. So what are you suggesting, she asked. Her tone stern. Are we supposed to trust billionaires like you to protect the truth? Isn't that simply exchanging one type of power for another? Musk reclined a little and looked pensive. Trust isn't the answer, he said. Transparency is. No one should have absolute power, whether they are a government, a corporation, or an individual. The answer is not to silence those who disagree. The answer is to create systems in which the truth can flourish even when it is uncomfortable. The host hesitated, clearly weighing her next move, but the tension in her voice betrayed her unease. This sounds more like a warning than a conversation, Mr. Musk. It is a warning, Musk said softly, his tone almost apathetic now. Because if we don't confront these issues, the cost won't just be freedom. It will be the future of invention, progress, and the very essence of what makes us human. It was hung in the air like an echo. For the first time, the host appeared to be genuinely unsure of how to move forward. As she looked at the audience as if she were searching for some semblance of control, but the expression staring back at her mirrored her own unease, confusion, curiosity, and even fear. Just as the tension reached its peak, Musk delivered a final thought that shifted the focus from the present to the consequences awaiting humanity if these patterns continued unchecked. Musk shifted in his seat, his expression softening but losing none of its intensity. He glanced briefly at the cameras, almost as if addressing each viewer personally. Here's the reality, he began, his voice quieter now, but resonating deeply. Every decision we make, every piece of information we consume, shapes the world we leave behind. This topic is not only about power control, it is also about accountability. Are we open to questioning the stories that are presented to us? Are we prepared to hold ourselves to a higher standard, as well as our leaders and institutions? Your host leaned back in her chair, looking visibly disarmed. Her sharp demeanor had been replaced by something unfamiliar. Introspection. For once, she seemed less focused on winning the argument and more on understanding the gravity of what had just been said. After a long pause, she spoke. Mr. Musk, she said, you've raised some important points, but what do you want people to take away from this? What should they do? Musk's lips formed a thin line, and he looked serious. I'm not here to tell people what to think, he said at last, but I do want them to think, to question, to study, to speak up. Freedom is not a given, it is something we create every day, piece by piece. And if we're not careful, the walls we think are protecting us can become the ones that trap us. His words hung in the air, and the studio was filled with a heavy quiet. Everyone present felt the weight of his words crushing down on them. Even the presenter seemed humbled. Abandoning her polished comments and scripted comebacks, the broadcast began as yet another contentious interview, but it had transformed into something much more significant. So a moment of collective reckoning, the closing credits began to roll, but Musk leaned into the camera one last time, his expression serious. If you've made it this far, he said, his voice softer but no less impactful, take a moment to ask yourself, who controls what you believe? And more importantly, are you willing to discover the answer? The screen went black and viewers across the country were left in stunned silence. Musk's warning was not only about systems of power or media manipulation, it was a call to action, challenge to look beyond the surface and take ownership of one's own beliefs. In the end, the most dangerous thing is not the loss of truth, it is the loss of the will to seek it. Elon Musk's retort to the host's attempt to confront him was not only cutting, but it was also a sobering reminder of reality. The atmosphere in the studio remained charged, heavy with the implications of what had just been said. The interview began as a contentious discussion, but evolved into a profound and unsettling moment of reflection. As the screen faded to black, viewers were left not just with questions, but with a challenge to reevaluate their understanding of truth, power, and freedom. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more thought-provoking and inspiring content. Together, let's continue exploring stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. Your support means the world, and we look forward to bringing you even better and more interesting stories in the future. Stay curious, stay engaged, and thank you for being a part of this journey.